Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. I have the great privilege of welcoming Michael Tsarion back to the channel. And today we're going to be doing something a bit different. So this is going to be an interview where we're going to explore Michael's personal beliefs on religion. So Michael, from your scholarship and research, which is quite extensive and quite diverse in your pursuit of truth and tackling, for some people, rather uncomfortable topics. From looking at the comments and some of the videos and some of the emails I get, there's a tendency for people to make assumptions about what you believe and who you are, rather than ask the questions. So I'm going to just jump into a number of questions from subscribers, and some of these are my own questions, and some of these are actually things that we've spoken about that I'd like to bring out into the open. So going straight into it, without concentrating too much on labels, are you an atheist?
Oh, no, definitely not an atheist, no. I would say I'm more spiritualist, if anything. So no to that one. I mean, there's nothing dumber than a materialist atheist. And I've been fighting in my own way, not atheism, because that's freedom, right? People are free to be atheists, but I don't think people are free to be materialists. We got to save them from their own ignorance, at least that's the way I feel, because it is based in ignorance. It's based in deep insensitivity. And not all atheists are insensitive. Many have a great love of animals and nature, so I don't include them in that. There's a difference then between, in my world, between an atheist who may be going through a period, same with an agnostic. They may be going through a period where, they have to be there for a while, because I believe in the law of contraries and opposites and polarities. And that, and also I believe just in, a sort of a flow of history in which we're one thing at one minute and we're another thing another time, like a teenager or an adolescent can't think, obviously, in broader terms, unless there's some sort of like genius or whatever, right? But most of everybody goes through stages of evolution, rites of passage. And so atheism for me is a rite of passage. And some of the most fantastic people who later on become advocates of metaphysics or spiritualism were atheists and started as atheists. So I was surrounded by a very grotesque group of Marxists and atheists. I grew up amongst Marxists and atheists, and they were so horrific that there's no way that I could be an atheist, even if I didn't believe in a God. I couldn't be what they were just by the simple human atrocity, that they were. I mean, I just had to be much more open-minded, at least an agnostic or whatever.
So you mentioned spirituality. So what is spirituality to you?
Well, these are hard questions to answer, and I usually don't even discuss my own beliefs, but on a recent podcast, we did go over a little bit of information. Really, for me, it's I'm what's known as or I called a mystical naturalist. It's hovering between pantheism and panentheism. You can't really put your finger on that. It's wrong to say pantheist, because that still implies a God, and I don't believe in the religious God at all. And also, I don't believe in belief. So the practical side of me is still a mystical naturalist, because naturalism, of course, is what you can see all around you. It's the visible creation. And I just believe there's enough in the visible creation to prove source of some kind. So I don't believe in belief. So that cancels out religion right away. So what I mean by that, though, is, you see, in the metaphysical tradition, or in let's just say the Hermetic tradition, the mystical tradition, actually, it can be and has been divided, similar to Plato's sort of, little scheme, where he has belief, lo, and then knowledge, episteme, and then nous, a very strange word, N-O-U-S at the very top, So it is with other thinkers who've divided into religion, philosophy, and mysticism. And I've subscribed to that since I was a teenager, in the sense that religion is a kind of a starting place when somebody starts asking questions about being, in the sense that And by the way, this is very epistemological as well, because of course, what happens with the religious person? How do they even get to even asking about a creator or a God or a source? Is because something's happening to them that they may not even realize. And I deal with this in an article called The First Philosopher, in the sense that the first philosopher is any person who observes themselves observing, or to make it even more weird and complex, observes themselves observing themselves. Now, only humans can do that. Animals don't observe themselves observing. They have no self-reflexivity. We do. And you can base the entire structure, that tripart structure, it all rests on that, except that there's three different sort of takes on that. But it all boils down to us being aware of our awareness. That's it. That's the whole root of all those three. And so it's just different settings, different you have a microscope and you adjust the lens. That's all those three are. So it's perfectly okay to start with religion, because religion is based, as the others are based, in this awareness of our own awareness. We are thinkers. We can think about thought. We can step outside ourselves and say, who's that person? Now that's very, very peculiar, because perception gives us a world of objects. But we are also objects in that world we're observing, right? You look down and there you are as an object in the world. Wait a minute. How can the subject, I thought there was this big subject-object divide. The famous Cartesian divide between mind and matter and subject and object and me and the other. Well, perception shows me that I am the other as well as the subject. I'm the subject who's the observer, but I'm also the observed. Oh, wait a minute. And you can take that to the religious, level, or way up into the mystical level of, say, somebody like a Krishnamurti, or the big one in the middle, the philosophy. There's lots of philosophers who deal with this. In fact, that's what I said, epistemology is based on, realizing that there's not just things to think about, that's metaphysics, but in everything I think about, I'm presuming the thinker. I'm presuming myself in this picture, however tacitly. So even the most, normie, right, the person who's, it doesn't matter. They are snapshotting the world as they go about, but they're in the snapshot, or let's say they are behind the camera, implicitly or explicitly. So religion is based implicitly on what I've just said about you being, important in the picture of reality. Philosophy takes it up even more and inquires deeply into that. And mysticism is then the most rarefied, version of that. And that's what I would call myself, a mystical naturalist. And therefore belief, though, to get back to the point you were making, is that belief is not part of my beliefs, so to speak. It's knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean I'm a Gnostic, Gnostikos, right? No, I'm a Gnostic in the second sense of the word, which just means one who, values knowledge over belief. But I'm not one of the Gnostics, noun, all caps, that group of people we've spoken of so many times before. No, but there's secondary and tertiary meanings of that word. And it just means somebody who simply knows that knowledge is always preferable and better than belief. So the religious person is in belief, faith, fine. The philosophical person is in the search for knowledge, and the mystic is the one who's found it. So that's the way I break it down, really.
In reading one of your articles, you say, as far as I am concerned, there is not a single useful or positive element in Christianity and similar religions. Can you expand on that?
Well, yes. See, although that sounds really radical, it's about religion. It's about this sort of lower mud level of religion, in which what I'm talking about there is the mess you can get into once you've opened that door. So it's not to say that there's nothing positive in it, because I just said there is. There's the idea that I want to know more about the gateway questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? And where am I going? Those kinds of things. And to the extent that religion offers some answers to those, it's there, isn't it? It's part of this tripartite breakdown. And then there's the cultural aspect, by which if a person is a Christian, they're more likely to be moral, culturally. You see, so that's necessary in our fragmented, debauched, depraved society. So you can be a cultural Christian without actually being a total believer. So there's wriggle room, right? But what I was saying in comments like that is just simply addressing the mess that you can get into once you've become a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew because of the dogma. So it's not my statement about the evils of religion. It's the obvious fact of these divisions, these conflicts. And of course, it can also go wrong in your mind through the dogma. through what I consider mysteria, and mysteria are just false ideas, mostly about ideas. The ideas we have about ideas, and none of them are really based in anything. So when I say a mystical naturalist, the naturalist aspect is grounded, pragmatic, empirical, right? It doesn't, but just see, it's like Emerson. Anybody who hasn't heard of like transcendentalists, Henry David Thoreau, Emerson. In England, you had Coleridge and Wordsworth. In Europe, you had Schelling and others. So that is the part of a tradition. Some are more pantheistic, others will be something else, like that. But the idea is that whatever spiritual, I just call it the numinous, right? From the word that Jung used a lot, but it actually comes from a theologian called Rudolf Otto. I'm not sure if you know of his work. And it's not to be confused with another word that Immanuel Kant used, noumenon. That's totally not even spelt the same. Numinous is that, one could call spirit, but I don't even like to use terms like spirit because, one, they're kind of erroneous etymologically, and secondly, they're loaded with all of the dogmatic, inflections. So the numinous is something that is available in the natural world, so I just keep it there rather than get into the religions, because there's so much conflict. And in the name of God, we've done such disaster. And then, as you opened up with, because I've done research into religion, it becomes very hard to see all the persecutions of people like Allegro and others, we could talk about, and just this weird underside of it, the underbelly of it, the druggy thing. And so I'm 100% against any kind of drugs, any of that, and I've been around a lot of people who are religious maniacs in the full schizo sense of the word, as well. That's another thing. In my personal life, I've been around at least 7 full-blown psychopaths, and many of them were religious psychopaths. So again, it's just, I'm so cautious about the pitfalls and the snares and the extremism and the fundamentalism, and how the fundamentalists are their own worst advertisement for themselves. I mean, they just will not bend. And then when you see these Pentecostals and Christian Science and others, when you can clearly see these are throwbacks to an old drug cult, I'm not a Gnostic and I'm not religious. And so I really have to put a sort of a warning out there. And then to back it up, not just say it as some guy at the end of the pub, I've created my sites and created my books to validate and back up, my criticisms. They're not just arbitrary critiques. I want people to make up their own mind. It's why I decided to come on your show. It's why I did my articles, so people don't listen to me. Go and look at the evidence for yourself. That is the most crucial thing. But think if we didn't have religion, we probably had philosophy more, or even, hermeticism more, and all of this. So yeah, I see very little good in it at all. It can damage minds, it can damage hearts. And the greatest problem, I think, one of them, if not the most important one, is the belief in some supernatural world outside of this one. That's where, for me, it always broke down.
So I get my share of criticism, hate, and pushback. And no doubt you have experienced far worse than me. Can you talk about, through the years, some of the negativity that you receive from religious and non-religious people?
Yeah, it's mostly from Christians. So when I started my career, I was very favorable to Christianity. And there's a tangible reason for that, is most of my mentors in the conspiracy movement were Christians. And I love these men and still do to this day. So I entered in with a very, very liberal attitude towards Christianity. I suspected that many of and I knew it because they contact me, the goodly ones. But then, somewhere around 2005-ish, maybe even before that, became the internet onslaughts of trolls who are always telling me they're Christians and they're calling me Satanist and all of these evil things, right? So that was over until today, until went behind a wall and all of these other things as reactions to this. And so any last vestige of interest I had in Christianity was damned by Christians. It's just as simple as that. The constant, unwarranted, ad hominem attacks on me when I'm not really against those guys, and even have respect for Reverend Moore and all the people that, influenced me way back in the beginning. And, see, I grew up on C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and others who were Christians. The list is endless of the Christian, people that influenced me, many even in the philosophical tradition. For goodness sake. I mean, the list of Christian and people who've influenced me in their writings is probably more than any non-Christian. Schelling was a Christian, Hegel was a Christian, right? And the list goes on. And so I was very predisposed towards that religion. I wasn't one myself, but my goodness, what I've learned from Christian thinkers is immense. But any of the, bit by bit, because of these scurrilous attacks on me on the internet, bit by bit, it whittled down till I had zero respect. And that does in fact show then in some of my presentations, but there's nothing I can do about it. Christians are responsible, not me. I welcome them to the table all the way down the line. And then certain groups, actual specific groups of Christians, came and made sustained attacks on me through the years. This is about since 2005, it heated up really bad. And I waited 10 years to reply to them. And that came in the form of an article. People can read it on the Michael Tsarion website called Refuting the Refuters. And, time didn't let me get into any debates with him. And I was kind of just shocked. I just couldn't understand what this is all about. Why would this group of people who are meant to believe in love and forgiveness and charity be so venomous? I mean, just unbelievably venomous. I'm sure you know yourself now what they can get up to. So they did the damage, and they pushed me into other decisions as well, and yeah, it was tragic. So that Refuting the Refuters, the Pestilence of Christianity, there's a couple of articles on there, but my main feeling was, though, to not attack them, but to, show them the case even more clearly. So I hope I did that.
How do you personally disconnect the reading of the Bible from religion? And when you read the Bible, what do you glean from it?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because there's so many sources make up the Bible. So the best way to look at it is not as a Jewish religious tome or a Christian tome, but as a work of art. Or a book like any other, but then not like any other. The book of Revelation has nothing to do with Christianity. That came from a group of female cults called the Sibylline Oracles. And some passages are word for word. All that stuff about 666 and the beast. Man, that was like so well known in Rome. And the Sibylline Oracles were oracles. Their cult stretches quite far back. And they kept these books called the Sibylline Oracles, and they were coveted. There was a couple of editions of them. The Caesars owned them, and the Caesars, or more like the Caesars' wives, would consult them on a very regular basis. And the strange thing is that some of their prophecies were very, very accurate. And so their reputation started to spread all over, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and into the Levant. The Sibylline Oracles, Sibyls, it's, for short, Sibyl is like an oracle or a diviner, right? And they weren't the only ones. I'm just mentioning one of these groups. And so the Sibylline Oracles, eventually you'll have somebody on guest who will talk about this, but the entire book of Revelation and a good deal of the book of John are from the Sibylline Oracles. Completely just cut and pasted right over. And some of the more fantastic ones, like the 12, the New Jerusalem, the Mark of the Beast, the harlot who rides the beast, and all those famous parts of the Revelation that most people know, they're from the Sibylline Oracles, direct. And then you get from another guy called Apollonius of Tyana. It's like the Jesus before the Jesus, right? Then you get, the Gnostics, and oh my goodness. And then you get into the Jewish traditions of the Messiah. It's really nothing to do with Christianity, but somebody went along and blended Messiah, Jewish Messiah, with the Sun King Jesus. Oh, but then you've got the Sun King. That doesn't come from anywhere except Mithraism and all. So as I say, and those are just a few of the traditions. Then you get the astrotheology number. And there's even gematria and weird, hermetic geometry. I mean, not geometry, but wordplay. Then you got Pesher, as Ralph Ellis talks about, that the Jews were heavily into. And that messes up history big time, because one of the things about Pesher is that you're relating things that are not connected in history, but one hero rode a white horse, centuries ago, or Daniel was in a lion's den and was advisor to Nebuchadnezzar. And then suddenly there's another guy hundreds of years later, plucked from history, repositioned, and he's the advisor to a new king. And the story of David, that's plucked from Irish mythology. And, so history is just completely banjaxed. In one way, what somebody would say, I'm out of it. I can't respect a document like that. Another person says, no, it's a document of great intrigue. You just get to absorb the fact that it's Pesher, and then you can enjoy it. Don't throw it down because it did this, that, and the other. That was customary in those days. Just like under, the Tsarist Russia or the Soviet Russia, people wrote in code. They wrote little fairy tales and stories, but it's really about, the eagle kills the dove and, the eagle eats the chicken. Yeah, it's a metaphor and an allegory for the power of the monarch over the poor people, right? So it's not just in the biblical that you get this extraordinary allegories and parables. And Jesus himself saying, I speak in parables and never do I speak, but that it is in parable. Well, what are the literalists going to take of that? So I say, let's take it as a parable. And so when you hear Lazarus, that's Osiris, because Lazarus is called Asuras in the Egyptian. So La is like the French, the Asuras, the story of Osiris, who risen from the dead. It's just a cut and pasted, and then you go through it and you find out, it is. But since the dogmatic Christian will not accept you, then you must take on the journey of going and finding the original sources, like the Copper Scroll or the Q document or whatever, to try and show them, or the Sibylline oracles, and the Gnostic texts and all, to try and prove your case. I do believe that. I don't believe in chucking mud or just attacking. That's what they did to me. That's what the Christians did to me, without knowing anything about who I am or anything like that, right? Or what I believe. But I will not do that in return. And so that's why it took over 10 years to compose the article refuting the refuters. It was done intelligently, and it was kind of caustic. And that's because of the 10 years of barrage I received. And this is career ruining stuff, because by throwing these evil things at you, by saying you're a Rosicrucian, you're a Templar, you're a Mason, you're a Satanist, innocent people believe that when you post that on somebody's site. And, it definitely cost me on many, many levels. So, but you just had to withstand all of that criticism and carry on with the research, and just focus almost entirely like that. Stop reading comments. Don't care about what they say or they don't say. And, just carry on with your own career, I think, is the only thing you can do, really.
I'm hoping I've got the correct book, but why do you like the book of Ecclesiastics?
Oh, because it's poetry. See, at the end of the day, when I spoke about that division between religion and philosophy and mysticism, one thing that connects all of them is poetry. There's poetry in religion, which redeems it, a good lot of it. There's poetry in philosophy, very, very poetic writings. Plato would be that. And many others have a very poetic, and of course in philosophy, it includes people like Steiner and Khalil Gibran and all that. And then when you get up to the mystical level, obviously the poetry comes back again. So, yeah, the wisdom in it and the exceeding, poetic aspect. And in many ways, even, the book of Job is one of my favorites. And of course, the Songs of Solomon to a degree, right? But I think for me, Ecclesiastes stands out, as poetic, very, very poetic, and also very, very, very profound, right? So it's not that there's not profound works in the Bible, but again, did they really come from Christianity or Judaism? They may have been imported, from the Apocrypha. They may be, in fact, there's more, probably they were. It's now very likely that they were brought in, and just in the same way that the books were left out, like the book of Enoch, Baruch, the book of Jubilees, and other books that definitely should have been included, but weren't. So it's a big mishmash, and one has to take it all, the Apocrypha, other books that might have been left out of the Bible, and so on. It's quite a study, actually, that.
So you clearly don't believe in the Christian concept of the second coming. So what does life or human existence mean to you?
Wow, what a question. Yeah, it's learning. It's transiting from base levels to something more rarefied and awakened. Just like it's biological. Remember, I said that everything that I would say would be qualified by empirical evidence. Just as a child grows from the fetal level through infancy up to adolescence and then adulthood, through different rites of passage where life is challenging or your reality is throwing obstacles at you, it's the same thing in terms of consciousness. Now, to get into the whole story of the evolution of consciousness is too much for us right now, but in a sketch, spirit doesn't mean to me any kind of ethereal or any kind of otherworldly phenomena. It's the spirit of man. It's the word, the broad word that I would attribute to the whole movement of human consciousness. All races, all types of people, right from the dawn. How do we get, see, my mentors like Schelling, right, the philosopher, they were fascinated, and Hegel too, by the way, were fascinated by another tripart movement. You know, they were mystics and philosophical sort of mystics. Some were more mystical, others were a little bit more philosophical, right? But they're very, very highbrow, way beyond the realm of religion, normal religion. And they're talking about a movement from unconsciousness to consciousness to self-consciousness. And that's it. They're just looking at that and going, that is amazing. How did we get to become self-conscious? Remember I said about the self-reflective ability? Animals don't have that. Some of the higher animals, like an elephant, you know, and some dogs or whatever, show the woolly versions of it, but it's woolly. It passes away in seconds, right? They're not thinking about their life. They're not thinking about meaning, and they're not sitting there worrying about their death. They don't even know that there is such a concept. If sheep are in a field and one of them drops dead, the rest of them just carry on grazing. Same with ants and same with the bees and everything else. It's only maybe very few animals that there'll be something different. It's not to deny that there's a modicum of self-consciousness, but it's so thin. We are the exemplary species, Homo sapien, that has it. So these philosophers are going, I think that's good enough for for philosophical paradigms here. And religion offers you no real, unfortunately, the solutions offered by religion are just dogmatic. They serve people, right? But deeper thinking it doesn't work. It doesn't work on many levels. And so they're fascinated by how we become this. How does our mind split into subject and object where it can watch itself and pose itself? And even, as I said, the law of perception nucleates duality. It sees external objects, that's objects, but we're one of those objects in a curious fusion of subject and object. So this is the kind of thing that, they were looking at. And it becomes more sophisticated from there on, because just like Plato said, you start with sensual knowledge, sensual experience. You move up to more, cognition when you realize you're the thinker involved as well. And then you move up to nous. And the trouble with that is, the way I rephrase that is, as you move up the ladder, and to answer your question, you're going to become, you can't be collectivized. Collectivism, the idea of a social thinking or a collective unconscious or whatever, is going to be more explicit in the lower levels. Now, one other thing about me is I'm a personalist, and I get this kind of philosophy out of somebody like Ayn Rand and Max Stirner, certainly a little bit of Nietzsche, whatever. Personalism, it's really Gabriel Marcel as well. And so that is, personalism can be described as the further you go up the ladder toward the mystical, the more and more idiosyncratic your journey becomes, where you're not sharing it with other people. And the more and more private your kind of worship really needs to be. So the dogma, when I say dogma, fundamentalism, religion, I'm meaning something that's ultimately very collective. Extremely collective, like capital C. And it's not just with religion, it's with these twats that, tell everybody their dreams and all, this whole ubiquitous exchange. Who told you? You've got a wall between you and the other person. It's called your body, your skin. Right. Did anybody ever think? Well, the Hermetics did. He who speaks does not know. He who knows does not speak. Know thyself. Right. So in the Hermetic tradition, what am I talking about? Hermetic. Look up the word. The secondary meaning of the word is silence. And the logo of the Hermetics, going back to the dawn of time, way back to Alexandria, was the god Horus, a little boy with his finger to his lips, silence. That was the hermetic. Hermetic means hermetically sealed. So personalism is basically that. But to answer your question, it means that the further and further you get toward the gnosis, the less and less you want to, that you can even by law, communicate it. You can communicate it in art, and you can communicate it in music or poetry, but you can't get up on podiums and start telling everybody else what it's all about. And that's the law. So here's a weird paradox. As you grow more and your wisdom increases, the less and less you really have to communicate, except in the arts. So as my books show people, it's man as artist, man capitalized, artist capitalized. So the journey is really an aesthetic one, right? So what I do in my work is this. Traditionally, for thousands of years, you have metaphysics at the top, epistemology below, you have moral philosophy or ethics next, and then you have aesthetics at the bottom in the philosophical structure. I take the aesthetics and put it above metaphysics. The fourth is in the first place. And what this does is, of course, it transforms completely our whole vision of religion, philosophy, and mysticism by just doing that one thing. It's very brazen, and I argue why I do it in the book. I don't just do it. And it's others have done it in the sense that there was a thing called the aesthetic movement in Britain in the Victorian times and early 20th century. So there was people who toyed with it, but it fell into disrepute. It fell away. And almost all the people in it were Christians, by the way. So there's another paradox, where there were mystical naturalists, and you had a group of them called the transcendentalists over in America, right? So when you make your journey of life an aesthetic one, you're in search of what is known as the sublime, capital S, the sublime. And you let that be your guide, and that's what you're meant to sensitize yourself to. And that's what you're meant to observe. And that's what you're meant to bring inside yourself. But you cannot do it unless you're an artist. So really, man, woman needs to be an artist. In other words, in the simplest terms, they've got to start doing art, no matter how primitive it is. You could be pressing flowers or, making pots or, calligraphy or music or singing or dance. There is no approach to the real. There is no approach to the truth in my philosophy until you have understood the nature of art and become an artist, and then gone into the aesthetics of art, in the search of the sublime. And you can find this in the Christian tradition. Jacob Bohm, seeing the light in the candlestick, that completely opened his eyes. So another person looks at a landscape, another person, for them it can be that, say you're not an artist, then the next thing is to appreciate it. See, I'm a hopeless artist, right? I play music and everything, but what I do is I listen to music and appreciate art. Art has surrounded me. Everything in my life started with an art appreciation long before I got into philosophy and anything like that. But there is a philosophy out there, a philosophy of aesthetics. It's always been put into last place. I think that's a terrible tragedy, and once you put the aesthetics on the top, then don't you see that the ones below are transformed? It's like sidelighting them. Even moral philosophy is totally changed, isn't it? If you were aware of the splendor and beauty of nature, could you do evil? So there you are. So metaphysics, just by turning that thing around structurally, I think there's a massive transformation in the entire worldview. And that's what I advocate, and I do that. I've got an article on the Michael Tsarion website called Mysticism, Truth or Falsity. People can start there, and just jump in, because there's a couple of other articles on that. Art and Imagination is a good one. So there's maybe 5-6 good articles on that philosophy for people to understand. And again, the case of why religion is not to be prioritized. You can't throw it out, obviously, because it has some value. There is poetry in it. There's a tremendous amount of imagination involved in, the story of Genesis. And like I say, it's full of colorful, rich, mythic motifs, many of them taken from the stars, for goodness sake. So I wouldn't throw it out, but I would reteach it. I would get rid of the dogma, the fanaticism, the fundamentalism, and I would turn it into a book of art and let people realize that in that form, it can be on the altar. It needs to be prioritized, the Bible. once you understand what a phenomenal history it is, and when you look at it from this artistic point of view, then I think, and this is how one of my greatest mentors did see it, a man called William Blake, back in the 18th century, mystic poet. He looked at it that way. He was fascinated with the book of Job, and he illustrated the Bible, and for him, it was exactly that. It was a Bible, but a Bible of the imagination. And, in terms of art, in terms of high art, I must say, not just the rubbish that, passes for art today, or Damien Hirsch's and what have you. I don't mean that trash. I mean the high art, both in music, both in, poetry and art.
+500 years from now, where do you see Christianity?
Well, Christianity, in the dogmatic sense, is in terrible, terrible trouble, and has been for a while. There's a crisis, and the bishops know it. So what's going to happen is either they're going to have to find something from the philosophical world that will re-inject it with some adrenaline. The ways that they've chosen now to go woke and to go real socialistic and all, that's not the solution. Because the Orthodox, sort of more conservative Christians won't have anything to do with that. And on an ideological level, as more and more people discover that Jesus is just the Sun King, and all of these parameters fade away, all paradigms bust. It's not just going to be in religion or Christianity. What do you think science is? It's always got some idol that's, find out to be made of tin, and then you have to throw it down and replace it. Christianity is the same. It's already going through a massive, massive meltdown and crisis. So, but it doesn't mean that it can't be, in some way reconstituted. And that is what is happening right now. There is a lot of infusion. And so they're a little bit more open to mysticism, but I don't know if it's good mysticism. They might bring in things like meditation and yoga. They might try to emulate some of the rubbish in the East, all to bolster it. Like, the thing is falling, right? So you need to put in a pylon. You got to put some scaffolding in. They may turn more back to Gnosticism, which would be absolutely tragic. That would be a catastrophe if they went that direction. So, my feeling is that it should go more towards the Hermetic tradition. It should lose all this idiotic dogmatism and fundamentalism and denominational divisions, and pluck out from it healthy Hermetic traditions, and just go with that. Not go towards the New Age, not go towards Gnosticism, not go back towards some Judaism, that won't work. There's been attempts to do that. It never really works. You know what I mean? And definitely not to go to the East. No way should that, there shouldn't be any hybridization. There is something core in the Christian world. There's something deeply buried there. And maybe that's what this demands. Maybe a new idea of the transcendent. I prefer that they went closer to what Schelling was teaching, or even Hegel, for that matter. They were both Christians anyway, and that would be sort of an idealism, aspects of idealism. And I think that's going to happen. There are scholars out there, some of them are total deceivers, but there's other scholars out there teaching idealism in a fairly healthy way, nothing brilliant, so there's, one of the greatest idealists, if not the first, was the late 16th century, early 17th century Bishop George Berkeley. He's an Irish philosopher, Bishop George Berkeley. He's also one of the most ridiculed idealist philosophers of all time. These Bertrand Russells and their colleagues went after him like a pack of hyenas. Turns out everything he said was right. You gotta love it, right? What we know as materialism are refutations to Berkeley. Hundreds of years of materialism and positivism, and they lampooned him. He's the one they threw all the darts at. Guess what? As Rupert Sheldrake and Bruce Lipton and 100, Irvin Laszlo and what's his name, Robert Lanza and Ian McGilchrist and Gazaniga and Mark Soames and a whole list of these newbies in science are now going, he was right, because he was. What do you do with that? Right? So, and he was an idealist. Then you have a guy called Nicolas Malebranche, You've got Alfred North Whitehead, you've got Schelling, the #1 guy. And their philosophies, I think, is what, see, when Christianity came in, it kind of, it separated itself so much from the mystical tradition. And now that mystical tradition, could in some way come back. And this would mean Jakob Bohm, Meister Eckhart, Nicholas of Cusa, Isaac Luria, and so on. So, and there's, I have a site called schellingzone.com. If you wanted to know the list of the names that should be reincorporated, their teachings, go to that site, go to the library, and you'll see, a whole list of people whose work, some are modern, some are living today, but there's a whole list going back to the 1300s, 1400s, who were thinking correctly, and they were Christians. That's why I think this is valuable. So schellingzone.com. And there's a tradition there that is quasi-Christian and certainly might be, what I would look at. And then there's the modern science of somebody like a Richard Tarnas, Rupert Sheldrake, in which Christianity could widen out. And there's also there's a tradition right now called religious naturalism, right? Or it's also called naturalistic pantheism. So type in those words, look it up, see what people think. Religious naturalism. There's a whole bunch of modern authors. It's all based on Schelling's work, but it's hybridized. And naturalistic pantheism, right? And these are directions where science, mysticism, and religion meet. Just like Berkeley hundreds of years ago, and William Blake and a whole bunch of other people I could mention were trying to do it, but they were silenced. You know what I mean? So I think if a Christian thinker starts to widen his view, and again, studiously and unbiasedly and generously start looking into those things, there could be a major, you wouldn't need to then say, all right, it's going to be wiped out because it's so filthy. There's elements of it that are that bad and should be wiped out. But then there's elements that are very, very good. Like I said, there's certain moral things, we could look at, yeah. So I see it widening out. But if it gets caught in Gnosticism or Eastern mysticism or some New Age bollocks, right? I don't think that that's very good. No.
Something you said to me that always stuck with me is that you're not here to make people atheist. So in closing, what is it you would like people to take away when watching your videos, reading your books, looking at your interviews? What is it that you really want them to get from it?
Oh, well, that's simple enough. You see, the basic way to look at it is, especially what we call religion, is a matter of mind control, right? And that comes from the black priests. This comes from the black robes from Vatican City. And they found that it's not even really mind control, it's emotion control. The monarch, the autocrat, right? The crown, they kick you into shape and tell you what to do and busy your life up and, get you working. And the priest is the one who, realizing that you have anxieties and, peccadillos and psychological hangups, they're there for that. So with the two demons on your shoulder, right, then you're under control. And it's arguable which ones are worse. But they're both bad, and they are sucking away your essential freedom. So if you look at the Bible just as a book, then you read it just like you would any book, with fascination and curiosity and reverence and laughter, and all of that. But these people have realized that there's a deep insecurity within people that needs to be stabilized and needs to be handled, right? So they set about doing that. They set about knowing that there's something at the root of your being that is traumatized. They then offer you this nonsense about supernatural worlds and so on. And then when you bite down on it, the problem is then now you're not looking for the real solution within yourself, right? Because you've bought a dogmatic, shrink-wrapped, one-size-fits-all set of commandments, set of rules, set of regulations. and you get a sense of peace and a sense of, where you lower anxiety by following it. And the whole world has just done that, but that just makes you into a sheep. So my message is to, think for yourself, realize that a lot of it is based in sort of mind and heart control, and try to free yourself from it. Like Mama, you interviewed from Jamaica, right? Just try to come back into your selfhood. And you can start again. Always have the mind of a beginner. Always say, I can throw this down and start again. I'm interested in it still, but I'm going to make it a study now. I'm going to compare this and that and the other. I'm going to look into some of the more weird shadows of Christianity, where they parked things like the Apocrypha and other works, and I'm going to read Ralph Ellis and Tony Bushby and Michael Tsarion, and people like that. And I don't have to believe them either. I'm not going to transfer one set of dogmas for another. And it's like me, I never thought of any of these as controversial subjects. I just thought of them as interesting subjects worthy of study, and I never accepted faith and belief. It has to be knowledge or nothing, and you have to set that goal for yourself, and all the obstacles that will then present themselves, unfortunately, because the moment you say that, oh my God, basically, you have a lot of forces who will come against you to stop you from moving forward on that road, and leaving the collective, really. So, but realizing how difficult it is, that's why I was motivated to create the sites. And they all have that one agenda. All the books, all the, stuff has an agenda to say, I know people don't have the 30 years to pick up the slack of the lies that they've been told, because that's exactly right. And they don't have a person they can call, dial 800 to Tsarion, come over here and talk to this priest or bishop. They don't have the time. I don't have the time. It's not going to happen. So then the next best thing you can do is, learn some of the things from the websites and the books, and then you can use those to fortify your own argument. But I always have emphasized the idea of, articulation. Don't go up against any of these people unless you're very eloquent and you have the grasp of all the facts. So it's an ongoing process, really, and you can use religious tenets as a stabilizer, but you must commit to a personal study of things, so that you're moving more towards knowledge than belief, actually.
Michael Tsarion, thank you.